And Marcian is Senior Vice President, General Manager of Video Services for Comcast, which covers all of cable. He's got a broad range of activities. Marcian, can you just tell us kind of the landscape of what you cover, what you're responsible for?
Sure. So my job at Comcast is I'm responsible for all things video. And that means the traditional cable TV that we deliver to people's TV sets in their home. And it means all the new things that we're doing with video across multiple platforms and partnerships. And a piece of that is my team is very focused on developing advanced advertising technologies and working with Canoe and working with other partners in order to enable new capabilities for people to monetize video, marketers and the networks that we work with.
And that's a pretty broad spectrum.
Sure.
So obviously a lot of what you do is focused into the set-top box.
Yeah.
And I remember in 2003, I think it was, when the cable industry under John Malone, who was at TCI at the time, said, stick with the dumb box. You know, the dumb set-top box, don't focus on video on demand, don't focus on DVR technology, don't focus on addressability. And it's typically a 7 to 10 year amortization. So here we are 10 years later, we're seeing a whole new generation of set-top boxes. Help me understand kind of where we are in terms of penetration of advanced set-top boxes into the home.
Sure. So just within Comcast, we have about 23 million video subscribers. In their homes, we connect almost 60 million televisions. Those 60 million televisions all have access to video on demand. And we have the ability now to target advertising on video on demand. And increasingly, we are working on a rollout plan to allow targeting of linear video as well. So we do a lot of geographic targeting already. We do that kind of not at the set-top box, but behind the set-top box. And increasingly through the set-top boxes, we are looking to allow marketers to target ads specifically to a household based on whatever demographic or household information is relevant for that ad.
And what percentage of those 23 million are you also providing high-speed internet access to?
Roughly 2/3 of them. So most of our customers buy multiple products for us. And in many cases, obviously our kind of second most penetrated product is high-speed data. The reason is increasingly, just as you were describing, we're seeing people use different screens together, and we're seeing people consume content across multiple screens, both in the home and out of the home.
In the last few weeks, Intel has announced a new set-top box that will have a video camera embedded. Verizon has announced their new set-top box. I think it has heat sensors to see who's in the room and what they're doing, which is kind of interesting, the video, the heat sensors. Intel, Verizon, Microsoft has announced that the next generation of Xbox, you may not be able to deactivate the video camera. It'll be always on. So we're seeing your competitors, but also partners, changing the nature of the set-top box. So can you talk a bit within Comcast where you see the future of the set-top box headed, especially in these kinds of invasive technologies?
Sure, and I'll tell the story from a couple different angles. I guess I'll start by saying that we, almost a year ago, launched our next generation set-top box platform. We call it the X1 platform. And the big difference between that and the set-top boxes of the past is that it used to be we would ask the box to do all the work. And so, our CTO is a guy named Tony Werner, and he's always tired of hearing, how bad our UI is relative to a Roku or an Apple TV. Because he says, well, have Roku or Apple build a UI on a 7-year-old computer and see how good they do. And that historically was one of the challenges, that we'd create a set-top box and we'd put it out there, and it would sit out there for a long period of time, and over time, the experience becomes less and less compelling. So what we've done instead is we've taken a lot of the work that the set-top box used to do and put it in the cloud. And now on our X1 platform, we actually deliver the whole UI experience from the cloud. It allows us to do on a set-top box what you can do on a computer. It allows us to personalize, to create kind of a better overall experience, and ultimately to introduce a whole bunch of new services that many of us haven't even thought about yet, where before you couldn't. You shipped it, and then it had to live out there for 7 years. So now turning it to what a lot of the other players in the industry are doing. We work closely, and I'll give one example, is with Microsoft on Xbox. We make our video content available on an Xbox. One of the reasons that we did it was to learn. The Xbox has a lot more kind of innovation than a traditional set-top box does. It allows you to motion and pick things. It allows you to talk to it from a menu perspective and say, you know, Xbox, I want to watch Game of Thrones. And then it'll find Game of Thrones for you. And it was interesting for us to partner with them because by doing that, we've learned about what works and what doesn't and been able to introduce some of those capabilities into our own now cloud-based set-top box. So our X1 platform launched without any voice control. And now we have an iPhone, iPad, Android app that allows you to talk to it and tell it what you want to watch, and it'll pull it up for you. And so there's a lot of examples like that where by partnering with folks, we learn about what's possible and then are now able, through the cloud, to deliver it to our customers. You know, what's interesting when I think about what Intel's doing and what Verizon's doing and ultimately what we're doing, there's 3 pieces that I think are probably very relevant to this audience. There's one which is around measurement. You know, the toughest thing with the fragmentation of the way video is watched right now is that it's hard to measure. And from a marketer's perspective, it's hard to understand what audience you're getting and how ultimately effective your buy can be. And one of the first things that this type of technology does is it will improve measurement. You know, today, you know, we're looking a lot at how we can use set-top box data to improve measurement. We're kind of working with partners to create panels that allow you to kind of understand what demographics are attached, for example, for a video on demand audience. And if the box itself can kind of measure who is there and give you feedback that way, it will improve and help the ecosystem. Second most important thing, certainly for us, is personalization. You know, there is this vision that we all have about how the TV is a shared screen in your house. But wouldn't it be great if it knew you were sitting in front of it and could therefore recommend something for you to watch? And if your kids come in the room, it could recommend something for them, and vice versa. And so there is a big part of the new platform that for us, I think will allow us to deliver on personalization in a way that's really compelling. Today, 70% of the content that somebody watches on Netflix is recommended to them. You know, I think we have, you know, the amount of content that we serve up that's recommended to people is probably closer to 1%. So there's a long way that we can go toward kind of shaping viewership and teeing up for people the most relevant thing for them to watch. And I think, you know, the last one is monetization. Everybody looks at, you know, boy, if you can see somebody's really engaged or excited by something, could you serve up a different ad? And I think that's ultimately part of the promise. But one of the things just to be careful of is that for a long time, that won't scale. And so as you think about kind of what your responsibilities are over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, there's not a lot that you're going to do from looking at somebody's engagement heat measurement as they're watching some show. You know, and so it is something to kind of learn about, but ultimately I think that will be a little bit farther off.
And Seth Haberman from Visible World will be here tomorrow delivering the keynote, and I know Comcast has been working with Visible World extensively. Yeah. Let's take each of those points. Measurement. Now, Comcast has been notoriously resistant to sharing your set-top box data usage with third-party suppliers. Charter is probably, DirecTV, Dish, and a couple other smaller cable operators, TiVo, have, actively been in the business of either using or selling set-top box data. All right, do you see yourself opening up your data?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, set-top box data, it's a complicated topic, and it's mainly a complicated topic because it can be used for a lot of different things. I'll give you a couple of very easy ones. Today, there's a measurement problem that Nielsen has, which is their panel is too small, and as a result, it doesn't deliver an adequate picture of what's happening from a viewership perspective. We've all kind of heard examples of, if one family in Kansas City moves, Viacom's ratings, go down significantly. And it's challenging when you have a business that's kind of $70, $80 billion of kind of media buying in the TV and online space to have something be suspect to that type of kind of weakness from a measurement perspective. And so I think we very happily sign up to help the industry get a better, clearer view of viewership in channels that aren't measured at all, right? So there's a whole bunch of cable nets where there's an audience and there's advertising and there's no measurement, and so kind of nobody knows. And on some level, we don't even bother to insert ads in it, because if you can't measure it, you can't sell it. And so there's an opportunity to use data for things like that, and I think for those things we sign up for very readily. I'll give you another example of where we're kind of very happy at this point to start sharing data is around video on demand. Video on demand as a platform drives almost 500 million streams just for Comcast in any given month. The bulk of that is television viewership, and the bulk of that for a long time has gone unmonetized. And so we've been making a lot of investments in infrastructure in order to allow dynamic ads to be inserted into that VOD content. We've been working with Nielsen on measurement, not just on VOD, but also on other screens. And to the degree that we can create panel household data to kind of complement the measurement data and create a currency around VOD, that's also something that we're very interested in.
And
yeah.
With VOD,
yeah.
What's the status on dynamic ad insertion? And
yeah, so 100% rolled out in our across our footprint. It has been for a while now. I think we are working with networks in order to start taking advantage of it, and we've been doing a lot of work with both Canoe and a series of networks to sign up. NBC recently signed up with Canoe. There have been a few other major networks that either.
So a lot of people here think Canoe is closed.
Yeah.
What's the status of Canoe right now?
So Canoe isn't closed. It's I would say refocused. Canoe showed up in 2008, so 5 years ago now, and it showed up as the silver bullet that was going to change the industry, and it was going to do all sorts of things. You're going to have interactive television and dynamic ad insertion and linear, targeting and just about everything else. It was this wonderful promise of what could be done. And I guess in contrast, I showed up to Comcast 2 years ago from the internet, where you can do a lot of these things. And as it turns out, you could do none of it. Just to give you a sense, the first product that Canoe had was the iTV. It was giving you interactive banners and apps that you could click on while you're watching a TV show. That was limited to 6 networks, so there was a bunch of work that had been done, but there were only 6 networks that we were working with. Of the 6 networks, there were only 2 distributors, us and Time Warner Cable, that had been doing any work to actually enable it. Time Warner Cable had not gotten very far at all. We had gotten to, I think, 4 of the 6, but only across 80% of our footprint, you know, and with some limitations in terms of the types of boxes that you could get. So there was nothing. I mean, effectively, there wasn't really anything there. And so I think what we did recently, and this was really Neil Smith, who kind of took everybody aside and said, this is a lot of promise and very little delivery. It actually reminded me, as Neil was talking to us about this, there's a Thomas Edison, I think, quote, which is that, you know, vision without execution is hallucination. And Canoe at that point was a bit of hallucination. And so he said, what can we actually do? And what is there a market for? And how can we focus on just, you know, less talking, less going to conferences, less promising people things, and more delivering? Let's actually deliver and set an example for the industry for what can be done. And so we picked video on demand as a, you know, very big platform with a lot of usage. You know, just the Comcast video on demand platform by itself is, you know, top 5 website in terms of audience and engagement. You know, it's actually probably the biggest website in terms of advertising opportunity against professional content, just from a usage perspective, if you think about it that way. And so we said, okay, let's sit down and put in the infrastructure so that within a year, we can actually insert ads dynamically in the middle of VOD streams. And we were able to do that.
Not just you, but the other cable
Not
operators
just us, but the other cable operators.
And how many homes?
Although there is something really interesting that happens there, which is you lead by example. So you could get all the operators in a room together, and they would all talk about what a good idea it was, and then everybody would have a reason for why it couldn't quite be done. Or you could just go and do it. And the minute you do it, everybody starts paying attention, and everybody starts rushing to catch up. And so it's actually been working very nicely now, because everything I've said about our own VOD platform is similarly almost the case for Time Warner Cable, which is now very far along as the second biggest operator, and everybody else is rushing to catch up. And so we really are changing and focusing on execution and on delivery so that we can take advantage of what is a great piece of infrastructure and technology that consumers love.
So I may be putting you on the spot here because we didn't talk about this particular question, but Netflix introduced the House of Cards. How many of you have watched House of Cards? How many of you have watched all the episodes of House of Cards? Yeah, it's a game changer potentially. We're seeing Dish, DirecTV, Netflix, and others producing original content. Comcast NBCU combined is one of the largest, if not the largest, producer of original content. Do you see developing within your family original VOD content?
Yeah. So yes, and you know, kind of important to talk, set the context a little bit for what's happening in the industry. Look, our value proposition to consumers is that we are the place where they go and have their entertainment needs fulfilled. So our job, my job, is to make sure that when a customer turns on his or her television, they can get access to whatever it is that they want to watch. And not just that, not live, but you know, on demand. There's this concept of timeless TV that we talk about a lot. This is really about, you know, time shifting and location shifting and kind of mixing the kind of the lines between what historically was internet content and what historically is television content. And we've been working to kind of pull all of that together for folks. So I started to talk about our X1 platform earlier, and the fact that it's cloud-based is important because it allows us to do a lot of things that we couldn't do before. But probably more important is that for every X1 television that we have an IP connection to that TV. And it allows us to bring in content from a lot of other sources, and it allows us to introduce a lot of other models. You know, a transactional model where If you can't find something live and you can't find something on demand, you can buy it. A ad-supported model where there's no reason why all of these multi-channel aggregators that you see on YouTube couldn't show up on your TV brought to you by Comcast, and you're now choosing between watching what they're putting on versus what you'd see on your traditional networks. And so we work very hard to kind of build an infrastructure that would allow us to do that, because we think it's critical to kind of our success long term that we be able to deliver to customers whatever it is that they're looking for, no matter where it comes from.
So as you look at the opportunities for advertisers across all the different initiatives that you have launched, and you look 24 months out, can you list kind of the top 3 or 4 opportunities that you think you're creating that are important and scalable and meaningful?
Yep, I can. And maybe I'll start by saying something that I know you guys are going to hear a lot over the course of the next couple days, which is a lot of people are going to show up, and I used to do this all the time when I was at my last company, is I'd show up and I would say...
Which was Grab Networks.
Yeah, Grab Networks, Grab Media, which is a great company represented here in the audience. I saw Dave McKeon earlier. So there is, I think the message that a lot of people give is that traditional television advertising is inefficient. And it is. It is inefficient, and it always has been. And that's not that insightful, actually, because we've always known that it is. The thing that people leave out, which is equally important, is that it is also by far the most efficient way that we have for reaching kind of our target audiences. So as inefficient as it is actually much more efficient than any other mechanism for marketing to the audiences that we're trying to reach. And so I think whereas a lot of people are focused on, look, I have a technology here that will allow you to shift dollars away from television into kind of online or into this type of targeting or that type of targeting. Reality is that I think they're looking at it wrong. I think television is the most efficient mechanism we have for advertising. What all the new forms of targeting allow us to do is to tap into a different set of dollars that are out there. There are, $47 billion in direct response marketing, and very little of that winds its way onto video today. When you think about kind of share shifting, there are many more efficient ways to do it through targeting around things like in video. And so first thing I would say from an opportunity perspective is video on demand is a viable monetization platform that monetizes on par with linear for publishers, for the networks that are out there, and probably even more efficiently for marketers than linear, because it is an actively solicited experience. It's not just kind of you're watching whatever's on, you went out and picked a show that you're engaging in that you can associate your brands on. So that for us is kind of the biggest and I think the most important thrust. There's another big and important thing that we're doing, which is around targeting within linear. And we do a lot of this today, right? So I think most of the people here know this, but when you think about Comcast as a whole, we are the largest television advertising company in the US, actually in the world, with about $12 billion of kind of advertising revenue, most of it on the NBC side, but a non-trivial $2+ billion on the Comcast cable side. A lot of that is kind of locally inserted television advertising. And so increasingly what we find is that by taking that, kind of whether it's local targeting or targeting in some other way, we can help marketers reach audiences more efficiently than they do today, as a complement to what their traditional buys have been. And so that for us is a big initiative. There's somebody else in the audience, a guy named Rob Holmes, who we recently pulled out of NBC into our group to really focus on these advanced advertising technologies and advance how we're able to deliver value to marketers across the board.
Okay, and can you share with us how marketers, potential partners can best reach out and enter into a relationship with not just Comcast, but also with the cable industry as a whole?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple pieces. You know, on the broad Comcast side, there's a couple groups. There's the Linda Yaccarino's national sales group. I think most people know her, and that's probably the front door where most of the media buying happens. There is also a local group within the NBC side, which are all the O&O stations, and that's separate outside of Linda's group. And within, on the Comcast side, there's the Spotlight group that actually focus on all the local targeting. So those are the three main kind of front doors to Comcast. There is, I would also tell all the networks in the room, a long line queuing up outside of kind of the new Canoe in terms of enabling the advertising and targeting capabilities across our video on demand platform. And so I'd encourage you, if you haven't already gotten your Canoe deal done, that it might be a good time to do it.
And can advertisers talk to Canoe directly?
Yeah, but it won't get anything out of it. I think what's interesting is
I'll forget that idea.
No, but I mean, so this was part of what was happening before, right? Canoe is a technology enabler. They basically, if you're a publisher and you put content on VOD or, or on TV, you should enable, go do a deal so that you have the technology to target ads. But the people that are selling the ads are the networks, whose content they're selling ads against. And that's something that always would get a little bit confused when Canoe was selling a dream. I think at this point, Canoe is, a technology vendor, and they're a technology vendor to the networks that enable them to do interesting things with the marketers. And so if you're an advertiser, I wouldn't go talk to Canoe, I'd go talk to your networks and find out the things that Canoe now enables them to do for you.
Marcy and Jenckes, thank you very much. Appreciate your being here.
My pleasure.